They locked her in a cage simply for being poor. They didn't even bother to pretend it was for any other reason. The cage stood in the middle of Sagebrush Hollow, Montana Territory, in the late summer of 1887, under a sky so pitiless it felt like judgment itself. The sun pressed down on the splintered porches and the parched dirt road that split the town like an old wound. People moved to the glare at a lazy, resentful crawl, their boots stirring up little storms of dust and contempt. In the center of the square, the rusted iron cage waited, a spectacle no one could entirely ignore. Inside, huddled against the bars, Sarah Wells tried to make herself smaller. Her skin was scorched and tight from thirst, and her dark hair clung in ropes to her neck, sticky with sweat and neglect. The blue of her dress had faded to a weary gray, so thin it looked ready to fall apart. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her arms heavy with iron manacles that bruised her wrists and bit into her bones. Someone had nailed a board to the cage that said everything in 6 crude words. No family, no money, vagrant. People passed without slowing. Others stopped to stare, as if she were some curiosity, a warning posted for anyone else who might dare to be destitute. From the wooden steps of the general store, Wade Harlan lounged with a chewed strip of tobacco between his teeth, eyes narrowed under the limp brim of his hat. He looked up when a wagon rolled in, creaking, dust-caked, drawn by a tired team that stopped across the square. The man who climbed down was lean and sun-worn. He didn't wear a badge or a gun on his hip, but something in the way he carried himself pulled the hush out of the air. 5 girls sat silent in the wagon bed, their faces half hidden under the shade of a canvas tarp. Wade lifted a hand in lazy greeting. "You knew around here, I reckon," he called, "that there's just some drifter trash. Caught her sleeping behind the stables. 2 nights back. Sheriff locked her up before she started begging." The man didn't answer at once. He walked closer to the cage, looking through the bars. Sarah didn't lift her chin. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far beyond the square, her mouth cracked and dry as old paper. "Why's she in there?" His voice was low, almost quiet enough to be mistaken for gentle. "Because she's poor." Wade replied with a shrug that held all the indifference in the world. "No husband, no kin, no property. This town don't have use for a woman with nothing." The stranger stepped up to the bars, and finally Sarah turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were hollow, neither pleading nor defiant, just empty. "She isn't livestock," he said, as if stating a fact no one else seemed to recall. Wade spat into the dirt. "She's not my problem either." From the wagon, the eldest girl leaned forward, her voice a small hush. "Papa," she whispered, "why is that lady in a cage?" The man, Nathan Holt, did not answer right away. He walked across the square until he was close enough that Sarah could see the lines time had carved in his face. He crouched, trying to meet her gaze again. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. "I'm taking her with me," he said, his tone as calm as if he were buying a sack of flour. Wade laughed outright, loud and scornful. "That right? You adopting strays now? That cage is the law, friend. She won't die in there. She's not your responsibility." Nathan ignored him. He turned, walked to the wagon, and returned with a wool blanket folded over his arm. He threaded it carefully between the bars. "Here," he murmured. "This will help." Sarah blinked at the cloth, at his hand, at the shape of mercy she no longer recognized. For a moment, she stayed motionless. Then her fingers closed around the blanket. She drew around her shoulders as if it might hold her together. Nathan reached to his belt, pulled out a hammer. Wade straightened. "What are you doing?" Nathan didn't reply. He swung the hammer once. The lock shuddered. A second blow snapped the rusted metal, and the door sagged open. Gasps rippled across the square. A shopkeeper froze mid-sweep. A boy dropped his paper. Nathan stepped inside and crouched again. "Can you stand?" Sarah tried to speak. No sound came. Her head moved the tiniest shake. "Then I'll carry you." He should have recoiled, should have called for the sheriff. But something in his voice, steady, without demand, broke the brittle walls inside her. He lifted her carefully, arms strong, but not rough. Her head slumped against his shoulder, the blanket wrapped around her like a shield. He carried her past Wade's protests, past all the silent watchers who said nothing at all and up into the wagon. The girls shifted without being told, making room as if she belonged there already. No one spoke until Sagebrush Hollow was a smudge behind them. That night, they camped by a slow-moving creek. Nathan and the girls built a small fire. Clara handed Sarah a tin cup brimming with water. Elsie offered a slice of bread. Ruth placed a bit of dried apple in her palm. Beth tucked a pillow behind her back. Anna, the youngest, climbed into her lap without hesitation and fell asleep there, small arms wrapped around Sarah's waist. Sarah looked down at these children she had not met before that day, then at the quiet man who had smashed the lock and carried her out of a cage. She took a cautious bite of bread. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel erased. The night settled in layers. Deep blue shadows beneath the trees, the creek murmuring secrets to the rocks. The fire threw soft flickers across bark and skin. Sarah sat on a blanket, her knees drawn up, her gaze drifting and never quite landing anywhere. Nathan sat nearby, whittling a branch into shavings, his silence as patient as his movements. After a long time, Sarah spoke, her voice a rasp. "Why did you save me?" He watched the fire, his face lit in shifting amber. Because no one belongs in a cage like that. No one should be treated like an animal. He didn't say it to impress her. He said it because it was true, and that made it harder to dismiss. She studied the shape of him, the hard edge of his jaw, the white scar near his temple, the wear of years carved into his skin. "I don't understand you." "Then neither will I." She looked at him, blinking rapidly against the tears that threatened to spill, wanting so desperately to trust a promise in his voice. But belief was dangerous. Belief had already cost her everything she had ever dared to hope for. Still, something in the quiet, unwavering way he spoke pressed insistently against the walls she had built around her heart. She walked back to her blanket and sank down, her legs unsteady. Her hands reached for the shoes he had brought her, pulling them close to her chest as though they might anchor her in the moment. "I have not had shoes that fit in 2 years," she said in a voice so soft it was almost lost the crackle of the fire. Nathan did not reply. He simply sat, steady and watchful, as if he understood there was nothing he could say that would matter more than letting her feel safe in her own time. The firelight flickered across her cheek as she lay down. Turning away to hide her expression, the worn leather of the shoes pressing warm against her ribs. Sleep came slowly, weighed down by all the nights she had spent waiting for a blow or a shouted name, for the cruel hand of someone who thought she belonged to them. But eventually her eyes drifted closed, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not dream of the cage. She did not brace herself for pain. She did not flinch from the memory of being called nothing. Instead, she slept. Nathan stayed awake long after the fire burned low, watching the dark tree line, listening for the smallest disturbance in the hush. He did not move when a twig cracked somewhere far off among the pines. He simply reached for the rifle and held it ready, his face turned toward the shadows that might be coming. The wagon crested the final hill just as the pale dawn slipped across the horizon. Below them, Bear Ridge spread wide and empty, an open stretch of land that lay between the brittle summer hills and the ragged fringe of pines. The soil showed long cracks where the rain had failed, but at the center of it all stood the house, sturdy, weathered, and alive with a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney. A swing hung slightly askew from a beam on the porch, swaying a little in the morning breeze, as though someone had just stepped away. Nathan pulled the reins to slow the team. The girls leaned forward in their seats, quiet with sort of expectant awe. Sarah sat between Clara and Beth, her hands folded beneath the blanket in her lap, her body aching from the road and the rawness of fear she could not shake. The wagon rolled into the yard, the wheels crunching over the dry earth. As Nathan climbed down, Clara whispered, "Papa, is she going to stay with us?" He looked up at Sarah and then back to his daughter, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening as he answered, "If she wants to." The words hung in the warm air like an invitation she had never known how to accept. Sarah stepped carefully to the ground, uncertain if her legs would bear her weight. She braced herself for scorn or suspicion, but instead, Elsie ran to her without hesitation, her small hand slipping into Sarah's. "I'll show you where the creek is later," she said, smiling as though she had never seen Sarah as anything but a person worth knowing. Inside, the house smelled of dried herbs and old wood that had been warmed by countless summers. The front room was small, tidy, and full of life. A woven rug spread across the floor, shelves lined with books and neatly labeled jars, a row of quilts folded with care. On the mantel above the hearth stood a single photograph in a wooden frame, turned so the light fell across the face of a young woman whose eyes seemed impossibly to know more than the camera could ever hold. Sarah hesitated near the door, her arms crossed over her chest, unsure whether she should sit or speak or simply vanish. Beth approached her, solemn and hopeful, holding out a needle and a piece of cloth. "I tore my sleeve," the girl said. "Can you fix it?" Without thinking, Sarah took the fabric. Her fingers remembered. She sank onto the bench by the window, threading the needle with steady hands as Clara watched in quiet fascination. "You do that fast," Clara said. "My mama taught me when I was little," Sarah murmured. After lunch, while Nathan worked to mend a broken gate out by the corral, Sarah stayed inside with the youngest girls. Anna refused to nap unless someone hummed a tune. Sarah's voice trembled at first, but by the time she reached the third verse, the child had gone limp against her, her breath slow and even. Long after Anna was asleep, Sarah stayed where she was, listening to the soft exhale of the little girl's breathing and feeling, for a moment, that she might belong somewhere again. When she lifted her eyes, they went to the photograph on the mantel. The woman's gentle face seemed to hold both sorrow and kindness. Sarah rose carefully, Anna still cradled in her arms. "Is that your wife?" she asked when Nathan came back inside, wiping the dust from his hands. He nodded without looking away from the stove. "That's Faith." She studied the picture, her voice low. "She looks kind." "She was," he said. Nothing else was spoken. Nothing else needed to be. That night, Sarah woke coughing, the road's dust still clinging to her lungs. She reached the cup of tea left beside her bed, steam curling faintly into the dark. No one spoke of it in the morning. The days that followed unfolded in a quiet rhythm. She helped with the wash, taught Beth to mend a collar, brushed Ruth's hair by the fire. The house was never silent, but never frantic. It was a place made of small comforts that asked for nothing in return, until the letter came, tucked into the slats of the gate, bound in coarse twine with no return name. It waited for Nathan's hand. He opened it alone, his eyes moving across the page without any change in his expression. When he passed it to Sarah, he did not look away from her face. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. "You are mine. You always were. I will come for you. V." Her breath caught. The letters blurred. She folded it again, her movements deliberate, careful, as though gentleness might keep her heart from shattering. "He knows where I am," she whispered. Nathan stepped closer, voice steady as the land beneath his boots. "He might think he does, but he will not get through me." She looked away, her eyes burning. "I should not have come here. I brought danger to your door." "You brought yourself," he said, "and you belong here more than he ever did." She turned the letter over one last time, then set it into the fire. The paper curled black and fell into ash. He said I was his. Nathan's reply came low and firm. "You are your own." She nodded once, then again, fighting the tide rising in her chest. That night, when she returned to her small room, she found the shoes he had given her placed neatly at the foot of her bed. This time, she slipped them onto her feet. Outside, Nathan crouched by the barn fence, studying the dry dirt where fresh boot prints crossed in ragged lines. 3 sets, one dragging just enough to catch his eye. Not neighbors, not his own. He rose slowly, his gaze traveling the dark edge of the trees. Something had changed. Inside, Sarah folded linens at the window, her hands moving in precise motions that helped keep the fear away. She saw his face when he came back inside, the quiet set to his jaw, and she knew. "What is it?" she asked. "Tracks," he said. 3 men came near the barn. Her hands went still. "Did they go around back?" "No," he said, watching her. "Just watching." In the back room, the girls' laughter rose in bright peals like wind chimes, as though no shadows lingered beyond the porch. But that evening, when the sun had sunk behind the ridge and the land glowed in the last light, Sarah glimpsed movement among the trees. 3 men stepped from the edge of the woods, their shapes black against the gold. She felt the blood drain from her face. Nathan walked past her and out onto the porch, his stride unhurried but unyielding. Victor Slade stood at their head, draped in a dark coat, his eyes sharp and smiling without warmth. Beside him, Ezra across his arms, his mouth twisted in disdain. Victor called out, his voice smooth and knife-edged. "Come now, neighbor. I'm only here for what's mine." Nathan stepped down into the yard, his reply flat as iron. "You have nothing here." Victor's smile thinned. "You took my wife. I aim to collect. She is not yours." Nathan's tone did not waver. She was. "The law says the law is a long ride from here." Nathan cut in. "And this land does not belong to men who trade women like cattle." For a heartbeat, Victor's expression went cold and empty. This is not over. Nathan's eyes did not shift from his. "It was never yours to begin with." Ezra muttered something dark under his breath. Victor raised his hand, signaling the others to retreat. The 3 men slipped back into the trees, leaving only the hush of the twilight behind. Then paused, watching them move in the dusk light. He thought of the night he first found her on the road, nothing but bone and will, her eyes hollow as old glass. He thought of the fire, the smoke, the way she had not hesitated. Inside, Sarah set the basket down and brushed Ruth's hair back from her forehead. "Go inside," she whispered, voice low. "It's getting cold." Ruth obeyed without question. When the door closed behind her, Sarah stood alone in the yard, the hem of her dress lifting in the wind. Nathan came down the steps, knife still in his hand, though the blade was dull now. "I keep thinking," she said without turning, "that he'll come when we are weakest." "He might." "Then we don't get weak," she murmured. Nathan studied her in the last of the day's light, her shoulders straight despite the bruises, her chin lifted. She was no longer a woman waiting to be claimed. She was something else now, something rooted and unbreakable. He stepped closer and set the knife carefully on the rail. "If he comes, he'll find there is nothing here he can take." Sarah looked at him at last. "I was his once," she said. "He never let me forget. And now—" She pressed her palm flat against her chest, feeling the echo of her heartbeat. "Now I am mine." Nathan exhaled, a breath that felt as old as the hills. "That's all I ever hoped you'd remember." For a moment neither of them moved. Then, with a steadiness she hadn't possessed months ago, Sarah reached for his hand. He closed his fingers around hers, not as a shield, but as an oath. When they went back inside, the girls were gathered near the fire, Clara with her book open, Beth mending a sock, Ruth humming under her breath. It looked impossibly like an ordinary evening. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching them. She did not know if safety was possible. She did not know if tomorrow would bring more ash, more blood, more letters in the dark. Nathan bolted. The barn door hung open. Inside, Ezra had Ruth in his grip, one arm around her neck, the other clutching a knife. "Step back or she bleeds," he hissed. Sarah appeared from the trees, stunned. "You don't want this," Nathan said calmly. Ezra was pale, wounded. "You took everything, my brother, my name, her." "She was never yours," Nathan said. "You never earned her." Ezra's eyes flicked toward Sarah. "You gave him what you denied me," he spat. Sarah stepped forward. "Let her go. She's a child." Ezra's grip tightened. Nathan's hand rested on his holster. "Last chance." Ezra's hand twitched. Nathan fired. The shot struck Ezra in the shoulder. Ruth broke free, running into her father's arms. Ezra fell, groaning. Sarah rushed to Ruth, sobbing. Within the hour, Sheriff Dalton arrived. This time, Ezra was shackled without resistance. He cursed them, swearing vengeance, but his threats sounded hollow now. That night, Sarah and Nathan sat on the porch. The fire cracked behind them. "We can't keep doing this," she said. "No," Nathan replied. "That's why we leave." She turned to him. "Are you sure?" "Bear Ridge saved us once," he said, "but now we build something new." She leaned into him. For once, the darkness no longer scared her. It had come, and they were still standing. The wagon creaked under the weight of new beginnings. Dust rose behind them as Bear Ridge faded. Its scorched barn, its burdens. The Montana skies stretched wide, stained with rose and copper. Sarah sat between Clara and Beth. Ruth dozed in her lap. Anna leaned close, humming. For once, her hands were steady. Nathan guided the reins in silence, eyes on the winding trail ahead. Toward open prairie, toward something unspoken but certain. "Where are we going, Papa?" Clara asked. Nathan smiled. "Somewhere we are free." Sarah looked at him. His answer was not a guess. It was something he had believed long before the road began. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Sunlight, firelight, cool rivers, dry ridges. Sarah began to laugh again, not often, but real. On the 5th day, they stopped near a cedar grove. "There," Nathan said, pointing toward a fence line. "Used to be Tom Reading's place. We served together." A man stepped out onto the porch, silver in his beard, recognition in his eyes. "Well, I'll be," Tom said. "Nathan Holt. 5 daughters, and a woman too lovely for a man like you." Sarah flushed but did not look away. They were welcomed, no questions, just space, shelter, kindness. Tom offered Nathan a share of the land and a new project, a schoolhouse by the creek. Nathan agreed with a quiet handshake. "Sarah,